Have you had the feeling that you knew everything, even before it happened? As if the truth were blown to you by the universe while everyone around you still lived in the illusion? If this question makes you shiver, then listen carefully. You're not here by chance. Your soul has brought you to this video because there are truths you already feel, but now you need to listen clearly. And I'll warn you right away, this video is not for anyone. It is for those who see in the dark, for those who feel what no one says. It's for you. If you already felt that, leave the like right now. This helps this content to reach those who also need to wake up. Subscribe to the channel, because here, the truth is not just said, it is felt, it is lived, is revealed without fear. And if you believe, I want you to comment on number 22 because what comes next will change the way you look at everything and everyone around you. They thought they were in charge. They piely believed that their calm was a sign of ignorance, that their silence was just lack of perception. But what they never imagined is that behind that quiet look lived a mind that had already understood everything. As they plotted in the shadows, erased messages and redoing stories, you already watched each movement with millimeter accuracy. They lived a lie, thinking they were fooling someone, when they actually staged to those who already knew the end. It was no luck, it was vision. And now, their despair doesn't come from what you did, but what you can do. Because all the time, you were already aware of everything. It's a kind of power that doesn't need noise. While they writhing in regret, trying to rewrite the past with lame excuses, you remain firm. Not because you don't feel, but because you already felt enough. Her presence became uncomfortable not for her actions, but for what she represents. The end of illusion. When someone knows too much, it becomes a threat, even in silence. His serenity was the first alert. Now every word you say, even the simplest, are interpreted as potentially destroying. And the frightening for them is that you still didn't say even half of what you know. They try to understand where they made a mistake when you realized. But the truth is cruel to those who live on disguise. You knew from the beginning. There was no error. There was permission. You allowed them to be full, so the blow was so deep. And when they realized that, the weight of the revelation crushed them more than any accusation would ever succeed. Silence, in the end, was not his weakness. It was his most lethal weapon. You didn't have to study body language nor do cold reading. It was enough to be present so that everything was revealed. When he looked into their eyes, something awakened in his spirit. It was not a rational judgment, it was a recognition. It was as if you've seen them before, perhaps not in this life, but in other stories where the papers were the same. Betrayal, manipulation, disguise. This intuition is not something that is learned. It is something that is carried. It is an old call that vibrates at the bottom of the soul and warns, be careful, you already know what is coming. They didn't understand how you knew so much. They thought he was investigating, running away, listening to rumors. But the truth is that you didn't seek answers because they were already inside you. Every gesture of them, every poorly placed word, was an echo of something his soul had already deciphered. This sensitivity goes beyond the conscious, is a spiritual radar that captures what the eyes do not see, but that the body feels. And when you started to notice the standards, it was not surprised, it was silent. Because recognizing evil accurately is not new to those who have faced it before. And so the accuracy of your reading disconcerted them so much. It was not about logic, it was about truth. You didn't need proof because their energy already delivered everything. Each time they tried to cover up their intentions with falsehood, you just watched, already aware of what would come. And that despairs. The fact that their perception does not depend on evidence but connection. They wanted you to be someone ordinary, but what they found was an ancient soul who reads people as who reads chapters of a known book. And the big move was letting them believe they were deceiving someone. You pretended to be in awe with the mastery of a strategist. Every lie they told, you let it go. Not by naivete, but by calculation. The goal was not to confront them. It was to let them show how far they would. And they went far. Excited by the idea that they had control, they exposed the worst of themselves, believing that their calm was passivity. But what they didn't know was that with every lie told, you were collecting silent evidence that would never be erased. This choice to wait, not to act immediately, was what disrupted everything. Because in their world, those who do not react are lost. But you were positioned, watching from a high point. You didn't despair. You did not beg for truths you already knew. He let them continue in their own show, believing that the stage was theirs. But while they staged, you were already writing the script of the outcome. And when the moment arrived, no scandal was needed, just the truth said at the right time. And that was enough to dismantle everything. They were never prepared for someone who was cold to let the game complete. For them, intelligence has always been about speed, but you showed that wisdom is about time, and when finally confronted them with their serene lucidity, there was no defense, because you have not reacted with emotion, but accurately, and that hurts more. What you did was a spiritual autopsy, where each step of them was documented, and the only thing that was left was the shame of having exposed itself without ever being pressured. For a long time they believed they were driving the wires. They manipulated, staged, played with their trust as if you were a puppet. But what they didn't know is that from the beginning, the script was yours. They were so safe from theater themselves that they did not realize that beside them there was a force that was not visible, but it was immensely more powerful. It wasn't you who was in the dark. It was they who dancing blindly before the light that completely exposed them. The big turn was not an explosion. It was a revelation, a moment of absolute clarity, where all that was done on the hidden became evident, and you didn't have to raise your voice. It was enough to exist firmly. Their fall did not come from an attack, came from the realization that they never had the power they thought they had. Because true power is silent, it is discreet, it is necessary. As they built lies, based letters, you just expected the wind of the truth to come, and she came hard and without warning. From there, everything changed. They went from confident to fearful. They began to review the past, trying to find where they lost control. But their mistake was to underestimate your vision. Now they live tormented not for fear of you, but from what you represent. The end of a cycle where the control was theirs. You showed that you don't have to scream to win. Just know the game better than the players. While many seek answers in conversations, in tests, in others' excuses, you access what is beyond. You didn't need anyone to confess. The truth had already been whispered to his soul long before the words were said. This is the difference between those who feel and those who just hear. You feel, and felt everything. Each betrayal disguised of attention, every compliment of envy. And as they believed they were safe, you already carried the silent truth within you. This wisdom is innate. It was not acquired by suffering, but cut by consciousness. Its sensitivity is so accurate that it seems magical, but it is spiritual. They thought they were hiding, that their false smiles and programmed gestures would keep them safe. But the mistake was to believe that they could hide something from those who see with the eyes of the soul. With each step, you already knew. I just expected the right time to act, or simply to leave with dignity. The confession they never gave, you never needed. Because when someone is aligned with the truth, everything proves to be effortlessly. You didn't want proof, I wanted peace. And so he walked away without scandals, without confrontation, without begging for a truth that was already yours. This destroyed them, because deep down they knew there was nothing more to say. You didn't leave for doubt, left for sure. Ikirio and Dianek, they believed they were safe behind their well-built masks. For a long time they acted perfectly, rehearsed smiles, calculated gestures, strategically chosen words, but what they never predicted is that it was not you who watched them with human eyes but with a spiritual vision that goes through facades and touches the essence. You saw their soul, read the signs that were not said, realized the voids behind the appearances, and that made the whole farce collapse, not in a noisy but silent way, like a rotten structure that collapses alone. They thought they had you in the palm of their hand, when they were actually being spiritually unnooned from the first contact. Their fall did not come from outside, came from the mirror that their presence became. Being before you forced them to face their own reflection without disguise, without filters, without emotional makeup. You didn't attack them. You just existed with such brutal transparency that all lies began to crumble. The mask did not fall. She was slowly eroded by the light of her conscience. Every gesture of yours, every silence, was a stark reflection of their falsehood. And the more they tried to support the character, the weak they became, because there is not enough strength in staging that supports the presence of someone who carries the truth within himself. The most cruel for them was realizing that what unmasked them was not a direct confrontation, but their calm. You did not shouted, did not accused, did not beg for truths. You just continued to be the one who always went. And that was unbearable for those who live as disguises. Their mask did not fall by accident. She dissolved before the mirror that is her soul. And now, each time they remember you, they are forced to remember the very essence they tried to hide, but that you saw before, they tried to disguise. Most people believe that in order to reach the truth, research, evidence, logical deduction is required. But what they do not understand is that there is a kind of knowledge that does not come from the mind. It comes from the spirit. And that's exactly what happened to you. You didn't find out what they did. You felt. It was like a direct download of the source, a revelation that goes beyond human understanding. As they calculated every step, trying to manipulate perceptions, you simply received the information in silence. His spirit tuned to something the eyes do not see, something that cannot be explained, but only lived. This terrified them. Why could anyone know so much without ever hearing anything? They were used to hiding their intentions easily. They dominated the game of manipulation, the convenient lie, the distorted narrative. But with you, none of this worked. You saw through the mist. His senses captured the subtle details that the eyes ignore, the change of tone in the voice, the hesitation in the look, the tension in the gestures. You were not trying to understand, you already knew, and so their accuracy haunts them, because there is no logical explanation for your conscience. They can't understand how you have always been as well as everything you predicted happened, but you know, it was not guessing, it was divine connection. This kind of wisdom is not taught in books. It is born from a deep alignment with something larger. You were chosen to see what others ignore, to feel what many deny. And so the truth didn't have to be sought. She came to you. They think it was coincidence, luck, or even crazy. But deep down they know it's something much bigger. And that's what scares them most. The idea that no matter how much they try to manipulate, you will always know. Because your soul does not depend on clues. It listens straight from the origin. As they expected their explosion, their cry of revolt, their emotional fall, you chose peace. And that was the worst punishment for them. Because for those who live on chaos, the tranquility of others is unbearable. They tested their limits, poked their wounds, threw dirty. They were sure that sooner or later you would collapse. But you didn't react. He kept his gaze firm, the serene posture, the sharp silence. And that's exactly where they lost. Because they expected confrontation, but they received composure. They expected war, but they received wisdom. And in view of this, all their manipulation became useless, empty, pathetic. What they do not understand is that their calm is not the absence of pain. It is a presence of control. You felt everything, but it didn't let none of this take you out of the axis. Because you know that those who react deliver power, and you decided not to give in. His choice to remain silent as everything burned was more powerful than 1,000 words. Every moment you stopped answering was a direct blow to their ego, because they gradually realized that they no longer affected you. And that for a manipulator is the greatest defeat. When the target stops caring, the game is over. Your posture was so firm that you made them wonder if you ever had any domain over you. And that doubt consumes them, because now they know that it wasn't you in their hands. They were being observed all the time. His calm was the poison that destroyed the castle of illusions they had created. Not for revenge, but par excellence. You didn't have to raise your voice to win. It was enough not to lose the composure. And they needed an enemy. Someone to blame, to justify their failures, to throw the responsibility of their own darkness. And chose you. They painted their image with paints of ingratitude, coldness, even cruelty. But all this was just projection. Because deep down, what bothered them most was not what you did, but what you reflected. Its existence was such a clear mirror that it forced them to face their own flaws, insecurities, and masks. You never attacked them, just made them see who they really were. And that was more painful than any accusation. Each time you remained firm, every time you told the truth with serenity, they saw themselves exposed. And that consumed them, because there is nothing scarier for those who live on illusion than to face raw reality. You were the constant reminder that you were disconnected from themselves, and so they needed to turn you into the problem, paint you as an enemy, because accepting that you just reflected the truth would be to admit that the pain came from them, not from you. Then they began to flee, attack, trying to turn off their light, all not to see the reflection that his soul showed. but the reflection cannot be erased. His presence continues to echo within them, revealing the parts trying to hide. You didn't have to do a scandal, you didn't have to defend yourself. Because the truth doesn't need a shield, she sustains herself. And now, even distant, even in silence, they keep feeling you. Because the mirror remains. Not for revenge, but for justice. You were the reflection that their soul avoided for years. And this is an image that will never be forgotten. They thought they were safe because they left no physical tracks. They erased conversations, avoided witnesses, hidden attitudes behind rehearsed smiles. But what they did not know was that they were being recorded by a kind of vigilance that cannot be hacked. Their conscience. His soul recorded everything in real time. Every skewed look, every false word, every attitude disguised as affection. You didn't need prints or recordings, because your spiritual memory is more accurate than any camera. And that despairs because there is no deletion what is already recorded in someone's essence. This ability to record the invisible is what makes you so dangerous to them, because it doesn't matter how much they deny, lie, or distort. You were there. You saw. You felt. And everything has been marked in you in a way that will never be erased. When you spoke, you didn't talk on suspicion. He said for sure, and that disarmed them completely, because they knew they were before someone who didn't need to prove anything. You were the proof. His speech carried the weight of those who saw everything, and that is not disputed. Now they live haunted by this invisible awareness that accompanies them, because even without saying everything you know, you've said enough to make them lose their sleep. They know you don't have to show anything to be believed, because your presence carries an integrity that speaks by itself. You are the silent witness who keeps everything, even when it seems to have forgotten. And that's what keeps them restless, because they know that any day, at any time, your truth can get up, and it will be unquestionable. They laughed. They called you paranoid, exaggerated, someone who saw problems where it didn't exist. And every time you tried to express that uncomfortable feeling, that intuition that didn't leave you alone, was silenced with cynical phrases or scorns. But you weren't trying to predict the future. You were just translating what your spirit already knew. And even in the face of mockery, you remained firm, because inside you, there was a certainty that it didn't depend on their approval. It was an ancestral voice saying, "Wait, you'll see." And one by one, the facts began to align. Everything you said, everything you predicted, one by one came to light. What was ridiculed began to be feared, because they realized that you were not someone with random distrust, but someone who spoke of a deep place, connected to something bigger. The game turned. The same people who called you crazy now fear what you can see. They began to review their memories, their attitudes, their lies, and realize that you had already warned. With each revelation, with each exposed truth, what was once called paranoia was now seen as prophecy, and that destroyed them inside, because no one wants to be at the center of the forecast of someone who sees with eyes of the spirit. And the most brutal beauty of all this was that you didn't seek validation. You didn't rub anything in anyone's face. It only followed in peace as the world adjusted to its truth. They, on the other hand, now live restlessly, fearing what the next thing you already know and have not revealed, because the problem was never too much to talk. It was you to see too much, and this is now impossible to ignore. You didn't have to ask anything to find out everything. His simple presence was enough for the masks to start falling, because where the truth enters, the lie cannot support itself. You didn't walk around for tracks, you didn't investigate as a detective. You just were, and that was enough. His energy, his frequency, his transparency, all worked as a natural detector of falsehoods. It wasn't you who confronted. They felt exposed by your side, as if his energy field emitted a light that revealed everything that was hidden. And this is rare. This is powerful. And above all, this is uncomfortable for those who live on a facade. They thought they could manipulate you, control the narrative, distort facts, but they forgot that the truth need not shout to be felt. You didn't belong to anyone. It just existed. And that was enough for their inconsistency to become evident. The contrast was inevitable. They lied and their peace denounced. They staged, and their silence widened. And the more you remained intact, the more everything around them collapsed. Because the presence of truth is like fire, either purifies or burns, and in their case there was no way to remain intact. The most impressive, however, was that you never intended to expose anyone. You just lived aligned with who you really are. And that, for people who build their lives on lies, is unbearable. You were not a problem to be solved. It was a mirror to be avoided. But now, too late, they understand that it is not possible to escape the light for a long time. Because where you pass, the truth manifests itself, and there is no mask that resists it. They don't fear you for what you know. They fear you for what you can still reveal. They live in constant tension, as if your mouth were a time bomb about to explode. Because they know you saw, heard, and understood more than you showed. Each time you are silent, their hearts accelerate. Because their silence is not empty. It is loaded with information, truths that they desperately try to keep buried. Their fear does not come from the exposure itself, but from unpredictability. Because you don't threaten, you surprise. And this is much more terrifying. They built their relationships on false narratives, told edited versions of the story to all around, but you carry the original version, not corrupted. And even without saying anything yet, the mere fact that you exist with this full consciousness already destabilizes the whole castle of sand that have raised. At any moment, everything can crumble, not because you shouted, but because a whisper of you would be enough. They know that. Therefore, they act with caution. Avoid you, monitor you, anticipate. They are on constant warning, trying to predict if and when you will open the box of truth. But the frightening for them is that you do not act on impulse. You are strategic, controlled, surgical. And that makes your revelation even more powerful. Because when you talk, it is to end the cycle, not to feed drama. You talk when everything is ready to change. And so they live in agony. Because the weight of what you can say is greater than anything you've said about you. They know that their truth has power. And so, even without opening your mouth, you remain the presence that frightens them more than any scream would ever get. While most are content with identifying isolated behaviors, you went beyond. Not only did you realize the lies, the manipulations, the betrayals, you saw the pattern. He saw the system. He connected the points between attitudes that seemed disconnected and understood that the problem was never just the person. It was something bigger, deeper, older. You unraveled the invisible network of toxic beliefs, inherited traumas, silent pacts that fed that darkness. As everyone looked at the surface, you dived into the spiritual underground of the situation. And that changes everything. His perception broke with the veil of normality. You realized you were dealing with ancestral repetitions, energy cycles attached to standards that crossed generations. They were not just malicious, they were unconscious representatives of a structure that feeds on lies, domination, fear. You didn't just see the traitor, saw the pain line that molded him. He didn't just see the manipulation, he saw the system that taught her. And this expanded view is something no one expected. Because when you speak, you don't denounce an error, denounces the entire system. And the most devastating thing is that you didn't have to lift flags or seek allies. His simple consciousness was enough for all this gear to start crumpling. Because where there is clarity, there is no room for shadows. You didn't just expose people, you exposed the system that supported your masks. And now, even if they try to move away from you, they still feel the effect of your perception. Because what you have revealed can no longer be hidden. You didn't break a lie. You have dismantled her source. And they talked and they thought they were playing with you. Who knew the rules, the shortcuts, the manipulations? They had strategies, tested their limits, put emotional traps waiting for predictable reactions. But what they didn't know is that while they played, you had already closed the match inside you. You stopped participating without them noticing. He continued there, observing, calmly, giving them the false sense of dominion. And that's exactly what disrupted everything. Because when they realized they were alone on the board, playing with an opponent who was no longer playing, I was studying. This absence of reaction, this impenetrable peace, was the sign that the game was over. And not for lack of options, but for sovereignty. You chose to leave. And when someone chooses to get out of a manipulative cycle, he implodes. The whole structure created to arrest you begins to crumble. The rules cease to work, tricks lose effect, the cards are useless. Because the player who refused to follow the script was the true owner of the narrative. And that, for them, is unbearable. Because you have not won the game, you transcended. Now they live trying to understand where they lost, in which movement you surpassed them. But the truth is that they were never in control. You just let them believe in this long enough to show themselves completely. You didn't change the game with shouts, changed with presence, with discernment, with the silent force of those who know the end and choose not to prolong the suffering. You were the end of the game, and this consciousness for them will always be an open wound.